everyone. Thank you all for joining us for this afternoon portion of our forum. I am excited about this next segment. Here to introduce our funders that we have joining us today. Um, the goal of this panel is really for you all to hear from a key stakeholder group, Baltimore funders, understand the philanthropic sector, understand some of the resources that are available through this sector and their contributions towards all of our efforts to support and improve outcomes for our Baltimore children and youth. So I will introduce our funders. We have Danielle Torain joining us from the Open Society Institute of Baltimore. We have Billie Malcolm joining us from Baltimore Community Foundation. Adrian Mclemore from the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and finally, Dr. John Brothers from the T. Rowe Price Foundation. So we are excited about today's panel and happy and grateful to have you all joining us. So let's get started. Good afternoon and welcome, everyone.
Hey, everybody.
Yep. So we're just going to jump right into a conversation. And, feel free to sort of just chime in. We have some questions prepared, but again, we just want this to be as organic as possible. So we'll jump right in and get started. So I want to first talk about some of the funding collaboratives in Baltimore and like the evolution of funding collaboratives in Baltimore. And, what are some key things that people should know about them, including challenges?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Adrian Mclemore with the Casey Foundation. I think one of the ones that I could speak to is the Summer Funders Collaborative. I believe it was started before my time at Casey, but back in 2015. It originally started as, I think, about 3 funders. It's now since grown to 10, and basically that collaborative exists to provide resources for summer enrichment programs across Baltimore City, and it was in response to the Freddie Gray incident. I think one of the challenges and evolutions of the collaborative is determining and seeing if we're still truly doing what we set out to do with the original vision of the collaborative. And some of the other challenges include not having enough resources to fund the need that so many applicants submit to the collaborative. So I think to address some of those challenges, I think that we need to, 1, add more people to the collaborative, but then 2, stretch the collaborative and those funders that exist on the collaborative a little bit more to donate more resources. That necessarily doesn't mean dollars, but also technical assistance to get more programs funded across Baltimore.
So I guess I can jump in as well. So Adrian shared about the Baltimore Summer Funding Collaborative. That one actually, what you'll find with a lot of funding collaboratives is that many have spun out of prior efforts, right? So there's a whole kind of history and kind of evolution in Baltimore of different efforts where funders are attempting to come together in a more aligned way to pool capital, or at least align capital, which means each foundation is working in kind of lockstep with others to fund, a kind of a common network or issue area. Some that folks may be interested in, during the past couple of years in response to the pandemic, there was what is called the Baltimore Regional COVID Collaborative. And so there you have funders who came together in response to the pandemic to explore a range of needs, to share information. There were actually public and private funders involved with that collaborative. Out of that collaborative, there was the Be More Invested. So Be More Invested is a newer collaborative, which is focused on really encouraging funders to support local innovation, particularly local innovations that are led by people of color that are working in community at the grassroots level. And so that's a piloted collaborative. And there are many others. And so I just wanted to bring up that point that there's an arc of collaboratives and there's a relationship between many of them. And that's important to note as well.
Thanks, Danielle. Did anyone else want to chime in on that one before we move to the next?
Well, I would just simply say that for us, we're hub and spokes to around 14 collaboratives. We look at collaboratives sometimes where funders will come together, and we also look at collaboratives where we come together with a variety of different groups, funders and not. I would say on the funder side, we are a corporate philanthropy, and so we, right after the unrest of 2015, pulled together as a start 5 of the kind of largest companies in Baltimore to come together with the sole goal to aggregate corporate capital on behalf of community good. That group has now grown to around 27 members. And again, it's all folks who work within the companies on the social good side. During COVID, that group pulled together about $1.5 million towards hunger that went directly to Black-led hunger organizations led by people that knew their neighbors by name. And so that was part of us. But then we also collaborate on, for example, One Book Baltimore, which is bringing together large institutions and grassroots institutions to come together with the sole goal of getting young people to read and then employing actions in their community based on what they're reading around peace and nonviolence. So whether it's funder or service related, funders can get involved in a lot of different ways, or at least we have.
Regina, I think you're still on mute.
Sorry. Thanks, John. I was saying you actually bring up an important piece that I think we need to probably take a step back and sort of frame. You talked about how the T. Rowe Price Foundation is a corporate, is a part of corporate philanthropy. Can you talk a little bit about help our participants to understand the different types of philanthropic organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start. I'm sure my colleagues here can do the same. But it goes to the idea that common thing is that all funders are the same. We're not, right? So for us within a company, philanthropy is just one aspect of what a company can provide to community, and we do a number of different things, from financial capital to using our social capital to capacity building to, T. Rowe Price has a lot of amazing associates, and so we try to get them to get their fingernails dirty on partnering with community to do those things. But then you have, foundations that their sole goal is giving, right? And there's variations of that. Community Foundation, which Billie works for, is kind of like it's the community trust model. There are the community foundation for the community. Their job is to understand kind of all the nooks and crannies of community and give towards that. And then you might have a private philanthropy who says, I want to give to cats with socks, and they can do that every day, and that's their job, and it's up to them, right? And so lots of different variations and lots of different ways to approach and connect with them that can kind of partner with organizations in different ways.
Thanks so much, John. Danielle, actually, I have a question in the chat box that I'm going to kind of transition to, and then I'll come back. Introduce yourselves in terms of what your organization supports. So you can talk about what your organization supports or focuses on, along with the type of philanthropic entity that your organization is a part of. And Danielle, I saw you coming off of mute, so I'll start with you.
Sure. So as John said, no two foundations are quite the same. And so that's a really important theme in these conversations, and something to be really honest about as folks who work on the foundation side of things, because as community leaders, young people who are leading important work in the city, we often hear the question of, okay, how do I access these foundations, and like who works where, and like what's the approach to building relationship? And the truth is that you should look at each foundation as a slightly different entity and really work with the teams there to really get to know their history, their charge, how they work, what their mission is, because they're all kind of different. So John mentioned that he's kind of on the corporate side of things. They have their rooting in business. OSI Baltimore is actually a part of a global network of philanthropic entities. And so there are over, I think, 80, entities that are actually associated with the network globally. And OSI Baltimore is actually the U.S. field office, meaning that we are a place-based team. We are solely focused on Baltimore and investment in Baltimore. And we invest in a range of issues that have at their heart the desire to really support local movement, local advocacy, community capacity building, things like that, and across a wider range of issues, as well as from education to criminal justice to youth development and things like that. And so that's who we are. OSI Baltimore is a place-based team. I'll kick it to Adrian next, who works with the Baltimore Civic Site, which is kind of like our cousin. They're another place-based team here in town. Adrian?
I was going to kick it to Billy because Billy hasn't said anything yet. But first things first, the NEC Foundation is a national philanthropic organization. However, we do have 2 place-based sites where we solely focus on Baltimore and also the city of Atlanta. And our sole mission at the foundation is to help improve outcomes for children and families. There's a wide history, which we don't have enough time to go to today, but it's a really cool story about the founder of the foundation named Jim Casey, founder of UPS, and started, and the foundation is named after his mom. But we are I work specifically in the Baltimore civic site. So all of my work, all of my investments are in Baltimore City itself. And then we have a local team in Atlanta, but we are a national philanthropic organization. So we work all the way from here in Baltimore, all the way to Seattle, Washington. And I'll kick it over to Billy.
Thank you. As John hinted, again, Billie Malcolm, Baltimore Community Foundation. The community foundation model is different. We are not a private foundation, and folks get that confused. And I think I had it confused when I started in philanthropy. But it's a fascinating entity to me in that many times donors give us their money, they get a tax write-off, and then giving begins. So, you know, we have this opportunity to influence giving in a way that is just phenomenal. Many times we're dealing with alive people, like, and yes, when people pass, those donors will leave us money. And so one bucket of, I call it buckets of money, right? It sounds all rich, huh? But one bucket of money is grant making. And we have discretionary dollars that we're able to give out. Those dollars are bound by a strategic plan that is approved by our board. So yes, we care about the community, but we are in that grant making bucket of money, giving according to a strategic plan. And for us, it's about schools and neighborhoods. And ultimately, it's about young people. And so we pick these intersections, school and neighborhood, where young people spend their lives, and we're hoping to affect their impact or impact them so that they can affect our city in a positive way in the future. The second is straight up donations. And this part is cool for me because we have almost 900 funds, you guys, almost 900 funds. A donor can call at any time to our donor service team and say, hey, I gave my money, but I need help distributing that money. Most of that money is given by donors according to their own interests. But on occasion, which is often, which is a couple times a week, I get that magical call from my colleagues that say, help us figure out where to give this money. Many times it's small money, but when donors are comfortable, they keep on giving. So that second bucket, I also get the great opportunity to influence. And a lot of times I find myself hearing a donor say, which the number one thing folks are interested generally is education. And then from there comes a whole bunch of issues, but they don't know sometimes what they want to fund. So it's like, you like education, but then what? What else do you care about? You want to fund early learning? Do you want to fund college prep? What do you want to do inside of the space of education? And then the last bucket is our impact investing work. And, you know, that can get complicated and deep. I'll shortcut it. My organization may not like this shortcut, but it's like kind of the loan. If you think about loans, affordable loans that are really pushing an equity agenda, there's some partnership happening. It's changing, evolving, but that's not necessarily cleanly grant making or donors. And so I kind of think of us in those three buckets.
Yeah, I can just do the nickel tour if that's helpful. So we at T. Rowe Price, I lead both the philanthropy for the firm, but then I also lead what is similar to what Billy was talking about. They're a community foundation that does donor advised funds. We're a commercial donor advised fund. So we have about 4,000 funds within that side that gives to a variety of areas. Largely those funds give to the donors' schools, their places of faith, and then in some part they give to around the holiday season to the areas that they care about, and then there's others spread about. So that's one side of the house, and then the philanthropy, which is the foundation for which most folks in Baltimore associate me with, gives in a variety of different buckets. What I would say is that 90% of our portfolio is multi-year general operating support. So we don't fund programs, we fund organizations. Our focus is on making sure that organizations are strong. Obviously, we care in as much about programs as the organization does, right? And so our job is to help them realize their own self-determinations and to provide not only financial resources, but all of the different resources that a company can provide that can help an organization get to the next level. And within that, we have a number of different funds that are trying to do that, what we call citizenship funds or impact funds or partnership funds or a number of other things that but ultimately all of that is geared towards the same kind of values of trust-based philanthropy, making sure that organizations get the resources they need and that we break down barriers that cause them to not to do what they need to do.
Thanks, y'all. This context setting was super important. So glad that we took a step back. So beyond funding, what are some other resources that funders can offer to communities?
When you ask that question, my mind goes straight to the heart of the pandemic. When we were as a city, of course, nation and world, in the most unprecedented time ever in our lifetimes, at least, I can tell you that most of the calls, texts, and emails I got were not about asking for money. Mm-hmm. I was honored because people wanted to know strategy. They wanted me to kick the tires on what they were thinking. They knew about something, but did it connect to something else? What is the policy? And I'm saying all that to say that that's the moment where my city blessed me, because I don't want to be in this game to be a fancy funder who's in charge of some money. I have to be a good steward over the resources that have been put into my care, but I want to know that I matter to my community in that way. And so I would say that folks do that. Like a funder, think about how much information you give us when you fill out an application. We're on that. And we're on that every time you submit something. We see how your organization changes through those submissions. We see everybody else's submissions. Ultimately, we're seeing trends. We're seeing best practices. We are seeing how people are making it move. We know who loves them, who doesn't love them. And so it's just a fascinating world of information. And ask us. Most funders will try to help you. And again, before we get to money, you guys, if you said, I don't understand the demographic, I don't understand how this policy impacts that, send an email, ask. I promise you, there's all kind of resources. And so this is a shout out to any of the people I've worked with that even trust me, because I don't take that trust for granted that you think I'm going to steer you in the right direction. So I've really been a strategic partner, and I'm honored by that.
Billie has brought up some great points. I think convener and brain trust, when she talked about housing all of that information and noticing trends. One of the great things about working at the foundation, Casey, is that we just don't issue grant dollars. We also do a lot of technical assistance. We also do a lot of results-based leadership. We also do a lot of data collection and data implementation. And so I think a lot of times, especially during this pandemic, as well as a lot of things that are going on across the country, particularly down there at the border with the immigration crisis, one of the roles that the foundation is playing is how do we take the information that we have, put that in a concise way, and continue to build partnerships in the communities in which we serve. So I really appreciate Billie highlighting those points. And if I may add, just a point of personal privilege, that trust and being good stewards of the dollars that we have is so important. Many times, which rightly so, philanthropy is seen as an expert. You do what we want you to do because we have the dollars. But we still have to be good stewards of those dollars, not only to what those dollars were intended for the dollars that we got, but also issuing those and being held accountable in the community. If we as an institution, a foundation say, we're going to come in and help you do X, Y, and Z, then we should be held accountable for that same standard as well.
I'll just jump in to add that most folks who work in foundations didn't get their start in the philanthropic sector. So most of them were passionate about and rooted in some other type of work, whether it's finance, whether it's community-based work. Everyone has a story. So very often it's helpful to get to know who's on those teams at foundations, because often they have perspective on the work that could be helpful, that we're often not asked to share. And, if we're not asked to share it, a lot of times folks will kind of hold back. So get to know folks who are working in these institutions, because often they have kind of a deeper kind of well of knowledge that sometimes is untapped. I say that especially as it relates to the work of building and sustaining organizations and making the case for doing so. So a lot of our jobs in foundations is case making. So once we get your grant proposal, once we're in that conversation with you about bringing resources to your organization or your program, that is just the start of long work inside the institution to make the case. Now, as we were saying earlier, each foundation is a little bit different. So some of us are working with a family. If we're a family foundation, sometimes we're reporting to a board. Sometimes we just have a boss that we have to make the case to. But usually there's somebody who's in the decision-making capacity. And we have to do the work of actually articulating the why behind the investment. So it's often helpful to open a conversation about, well, how do you talk about this work when speaking to different audiences? What do these different audiences and donors actually care about? And how do I actually make that bridge? So that's always something that useful to kind of tap into in terms of insight. The last one, access, relationships, networks. We know Baltimore, Smaltimore. So don't ever be hesitant to ask someone for a connection to someone else. And then infrastructure. Each of these institutions is differently equipped in terms of how they're built. So Adrian mentioned the convening capacity. Sometimes we actually have technical capacities and facilities that we can even offer up to your efforts. So don't be shy to ask. It's always great to offer organizations the ability to like use the facility. Like if you need to host a meeting or something like that, those facilities are there for you. And ultimately they're there to serve communities. So why not tap them?
The only thing I would just quickly add on to my colleagues' really great statements is, for at least for us at T. Rowe Price, again, if you only approached a company for their direct giving, you'd just be missing out on a ton of stuff. And so for us, during the pandemic, we provided capacity building support to 1,100 organizations. We fund 250 organizations. So most organizations who came into contact with us came in contact to our capacity building program. We have over 4,000 folks that work for T. Rowe Price that live in the Baltimore area. Imagine them as experts in their field, technology, investment, all of those areas. All of them love community and wants to get their fingernails dirty. But also we have an amazing matching gift program for which I think $6.5 million every year goes out in matching gifts from T. Rowe Price out to our communities. And then relating to what Danielle said is our social capital. So, each of us has different social capital. We are a global financial services firm. And so if we're not trying to figure out how do we use the globalness of a company like this, we're not doing what we should be. And so since the end of 2019, over 100 companies have said, hey, we want to find out what you're doing in Baltimore. Part of that work is for me to make connections. So, Mr. C at Rose Street, we hooked him up with Toyota, right? Where he's got a new truck. Like there's others that we've connected with. And so it's the idea of like, how do we use our social capital to make connections with others, knowing that Baltimore is Smaltimore. We are provincial sometimes too, but also there's a whole wide world out there in which Baltimore's doing amazing things, and we need to be connecting our amazingness to others who also want to be helpful.
Thank you all so much. I've heard, technical assistance, thought partnership, data and research, capacity building, networking, fellowships, policy advocacy, matching gifts, social capital, and I would add even employee volunteers. So lots of other resources that the funding community has to offer to community-based organizations. So specifically thinking about the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund's values of racial equity, commitment to young people, and community ownership, right? For those who joined us yesterday, you heard from Dion and Davon who talked about this different approach to philanthropy. For you all, I would ask, what does it look like to sort of move beyond actual conception of these principles to actualization or implementation of them?
I mean, I guess I'll kick it off. Those three words or concepts, racial equity, young people, and community ownership, everybody's throwing them around right now. They are the popular words, and all of them are hard. You're not going to come in and turn racial injustice on top of its head in a couple of years. You are not. I barely escaped my childhood. When I look at what young people got to go through their day, it's generational. They are trapped. Some of them aren't even getting a chance before they can even get started. And that you're not fixing easy. And when it comes to community ownership, when a community has been disinvested in, ignored, and then you're going to come in with resources, they're not even ready for you. That's me. I'm in work where people weren't ready for me. So I'm spending time to help people get ready for the opportunity. Again, I can't just show up with my fancy opportunity. I had a community tell me, we're not meeting with you, and we don't care how much money you have. What? Shut the door on that, right? We don't care, because we're sick of all y'all in philanthropy. So I had to prove myself, and I had to earn the opportunity to get up in that community. Now they love me now. Just want to put the record out there, right? But I had to put the time in, and I had to prove it. And a lot of that time, it is simply showing up, right, in people's spaces. We can't keep sitting back in philanthropy inviting you to our space. We got to get up in the space and spend our time there. And we have to love from our heart. This whole, oh, I feel compassion for, or empathy, or no, are you moved because you love the children of this city and you understand what the paths are? This state has double the national average of Black prisoners. This state, I just learned this from our transportation team yesterday, has the top number of breakdowns and needed repairs in the public transit system. Like these conditions, like y'all, this is a lifestyle. This is, you're eating it and drinking it. You don't get to, this is not a hobby because it's fun and it's trendy. And so I have sacrificed a lot to be in this space, and all the people I find the time to do it with are worth it. They're worth it, but I'm exhausted, right? And so I'm just being real. It's like, I've got to find a life balance, but I think that's what it takes, because I'm watching things move in these stubborn places, race equity, again, young people that are locked out and communities that are locked out. So let me get off my soapbox before I really start acting up. Put me on mute. Go ahead, colleagues.
So I'll jump in. So everybody was just like, yes, Billie. That's how I was feeling. But the only thing I would add is that the thing I really appreciate about the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund in particular is that it is about embodying the value of racial justice, I would say, and racial equity and liberatory practice by shifting power and shifting traditional dynamics in terms of who is empowered to actually make decisions around where resources go and what that looks like, right? And, you know, in philanthropy, often the mistake we make is that we want to see everything happen fast. It's like, okay, so, you know, everything has to happen overnight. And then there's a question of, okay, show me the outcomes. But this work requires time. It requires a true investment and an authentic investment in relationship building, trust building. And it also requires a level of infrastructure. Like when you think about what it takes to create a new table, then bring people into relationship around that decision-making table in a way that everyone is grounded and rooted in strong information about that will inform their analysis of where information should go. That requires what? Good facilitators. It requires time for folks to get to know each other and feel comfortable in a decision-making space. And it also requires capacity to translate those dialogues and that analysis into, you know, a path to getting resources to organizations. And then I'll also just throw out the point around building local capacity. And so many of you in this room, this space, are leading important efforts around the city. And we recognize that the work of receiving capital, receiving resource, managing that capital, and then also doing what you do on a day-to-day requires a lot of capacity. And so that is something also that BCYF as a funding institution is very unique in voicing up about and really committing to, is building sustainable capacity among grassroots organizations that are serving our young people, which is really, really important. So when we talk about what it practically looks like to operationalize these values, it actually is, we have to get out of the fluff and actually into the work of building the capacity to hold these values and realize them in our work every day. So that's what I would add about what I really appreciate about BCYF in particular and where it's leading in this space.
I'll go next, Adrian, if that's okay. What I would add just real quickly to that, you know, is I was fortunate enough to be the co-chair with Adam from Leaders from a Beautiful Struggle for the original group that put together the Youth Fund. And I think what I learned, but through that process, that process was very much out in front, said that in order to do this work, philanthropy has to acknowledge the damage that it has done in community You can't build authentic relationships in community, especially if you represent philanthropy, unless you've acknowledged the damage that you've done. If I want to form relationship with anyone and the worldview that I come from has done damage, that relationship's not going to be tight unless we have been, number one, really clear on what damage has we done. And then in forming relationship, to what Billie mentioned, I can't form relationship unless I've done that. And so, you know, and I learned that from the Youth Fund, being a part of the Youth Fund process. What I would also say is, you know, right after the murder of George Floyd, 20 Minneapolis companies called T. Rowe Price and said, hey, will you talk to us? Because we want to now have authentic relationships in community. And I said, well, number one, you can't buy that, right? And you have to, again, begin by acknowledging that you have done damage, and that you have to start there. And if you can't start there and you don't know what damage you've caused, that's a problem, right? And so, you know, what we're seeing, to what Billie said, is the usage of words like racial justice, like trust building, right? All of these things that are now becoming jargony, you know, can be a form of structural racism. And so for us, we need to make sure that those words mean something, and that when those words are used by folks that have done damage in community, that they're held accountable to acknowledge their part in that. And I think you can't build trust in community, and you can't, for me at least, I can't live by the values that I think the Youth Fund has put inside me, unless each and every day I'm earning that trust in community, but also living by those norms.
All right, good stuff, y'all. So I'm gonna actually like combine two questions, and then we're gonna jump to the Q&A in the comments. What is your recommendation for newer programs who are looking for funding? And then, Danielle, you mentioned sort of building sustainable local capacity among grassroots orgs, right? So how do you aim to make funding more accessible to those grassroots programs who may have less capacity, or, you know, staff without formal grant writing experience? So recommendations for new programs, and then making funding more accessible to grassroots programs.
I could kick it off, and I'm going to kick it off with a statement that some people are not going to like, but it's the truth anyhow. And that is, as a funder, I don't want to speak for the other funders. As a funder, it is not my job to fund your dream. And so when you're getting started and you think everybody's going to run to you because you got this dream and you're amazing and you're going to make change, I think that's beautiful. But my actual job is to be a good steward over the money that has been entrusted into my care. So my duty is to donors and my board, and I'm keeping it real with you. So what does that mean? It means I have to invest well. And so your job as a new group is prove that you invest well. Now, you may not like the power dynamic. Prove what? I shouldn't have to prove anything, but we are making an investment. So what am I going on? You know, I like to do this run through with grassroots groups. Sometimes I'm going to your webpage. A lot of people want me to go to their social media. I'm not scrolling through all your social media to understand what you do. I ought to be able to go somewhere and find what are you doing, and not just who you are and what you've been through. Because I've been through some stuff too. I use it to flavor my work, but that's not my skill set, and that's not what I'm offering. And then what are you doing? Those are popular. I grew up like this, and this is what we're doing in our program. Not one place in almost 100% of the cases do I find how good are you at what you say you do. Yes, kids need mentors, but how do I know you're the right mentor for a kid, right? And so when a donor is calling me and I only got a few minutes to give them an answer because they're going to offload $10,000, and guess what? You don't have to write for it. You don't have to write an application for it. You don't have to write a report on it. We're not even holding you accountable. They're trusting my word. You got to be that place. You have to give me confidence that I'm steering them in the right direction. Because guess who gets in trouble for that if it goes belly up? Me, right? And so I do, while I'm making this hard statement about I'm not funding your dream, I'm also interested in helping you shape, when I'm in partnership with you anyway, trying to shape your best self in this work. Because so many people are doing, do you know how many nonprofits in this city fund their own work at big levels, and it's coming out of their households? And it's like, man, I have money for that. but we've got to get you to a place where you can access it. So sitting down and really taking the time to strategize so many times, and all of these guys can say, hey, man, everybody's hitting us up. You haven't read what our guidelines are. Take your time and do the research. Find out what we actually find. I'm about to say no to somebody who submitted their 10th application. They don't listen. I spent the time, I've talked, but you are determined that you're so fabulous that I just better fund you. I'm sorry, love you, can't fund you, because this is an investment that we're making. I deal with invested-minded people, right? So again, take those words. And again, if you think I'm being mean, go talk to the people I help. They'll tell you, at least I hope my friends will back me up here, that it works. What I'm saying to you works. When you shift your mind from you're a charity to you're a problem solver, that's when it gets better.
Good stuff.
So I was pausing. So I can pick up on the sustainability question part of the question, and say that on the foundation side of things, there are many in the philanthropic sector right now that are exploring a lot of strategies for making resources more accessible to leaders of grassroots institutions. And these are conversations that we're having among ourselves. These are conversations that we are having with many of you. And so so things like more flexible funding, which we often refer to as general operating support, longer term commitments, reduced burdens in terms of application requirements and things like that. These are things that we're all, testing out and trying to really move into the mainstream, so to speak, in terms of our day-to-day practices foundation. But as Billie has really, I think, honestly put out there, is that there's a balance to it. There's an obligation that we have. And so with all that we may be able to do in terms of relaxing those requirements and things like that, always keep in mind that there is that work of case making that kind of translates into a reality around the work. Yeah, we have to get you into the strongest position possible. And as we talk about sustainability, I think that we also should be honest about the benefits and limitations of especially philanthropic resources. So if you put Baltimore into a larger kind of national context, we often find that in Baltimore, among community-based organizations, there's a trend of over-reliance on private foundation capital, right? So a lot of emphasis on where the next grant dollar is coming from, rather than taking a step back and saying, okay, how is that capital structured? Well, the reality for most foundations is that every 2 to 3 years, there's some kind of shift in terms of strategic plan, new direction, that kind of thing, that you can bet on. And so that inherently makes most of our institutions a bit unstable. That's why you see this kind of dynamic where the funders kind of enter into, particular issues, step back. You may have a turnover in terms of a person that was really passionate and a champion for a particular issue at a foundation. They transition out. And then you have the research button, and that's really upsetting and frustrating for those on the ground who are really trying to sustain their institutions. What I really think we need to do is have more conversations about alternative sources of revenue and reimagining the economic models that our community-based work is based on. So having more conversations about community wealth building, for-profit, enterprises, and how we can build the strength of those for-profit enterprises and communities such that we can invest in our own ideas around how to best serve our young people. And I think even Billie mentioned like impact investing dollars. Like a lot of folks don't know that grant dollars are usually less than 5%, only 5% barely of what capital most foundations kind of sit on. The other 95% is investment capital. And these are the things that we should talk a little bit more about in terms of the wide array of resources that are actually out there and what types of models can really support our work over the long haul. So that's what I'll offer as well.
The only thing I would add on those quick 2 points is that it's really upon you, if you want to enter this space, to also understand how the safety net is funded, right? So that, institutional philanthropy, like the folks represented here, is only 18% of the total safety net of funding in Baltimore, right? 68% is funded by government. But the biggest growth in that ecosystem is government requiring or asking money from private philanthropy to fund what they're doing. And so you just need to understand the way the money is moving, because that's going to help you understand where you should insert yourself. There's a a lot of ways to make $1 out of 15 cents. If you're going under the traditional ways that I'm going to be funded by that 18%, right? There's the nonprofits that are focused in Baltimore on poverty alleviation is a $1.7 billion a year industry. There's a lot of resources there. It could be done in partnership with another nonprofit. I think I put a link to an article that I wrote around sugar sharing, right? You're going to get a lot more resources on sugar sharing than you're going to get from institutional philanthropy if you look and think about the ecosystem and the way the social safety net is made. If you go traditional ways, you're likely going to fall to where Billie is saying is like there's going to be challenges to that because we are cutting and slicing a pie in a variety of different ways to make our portfolio sing the best that they can. And we are fickle on the institutional philanthropy side. We are not going to be funding, we're not Bert and Ernie, we're not going to be funding forever or living together forever with the same grantees. And so you need to think about what the ecosystem looks like, how the spaghetti is made in terms of how funding happens, and then strategically insert yourself into that so that you can think about sustainability over the long haul. If you don't know the way that works, you're going to be in trouble.
Thanks. So, as you all know, a theme of today's event has been around celebrating our youth, right? In particular, direct funding. Conversations came up earlier around direct funding for youth entrepreneurship, community organizing. What efforts are your organizations involved in, if any, that directly support young people? And again, you know, of course, keeping in mind young people need room to fail, right? And fail fast, but also balancing that with you all having the need to be accountable for that funding.
I was going to, Adrian, you want to go? You haven't talked in a minute.
Well, I'm making a habit not to talk a lot when people are making the points that I would make anyway. So you just sit back and listen and enjoy it.
Okay.
So a couple of things to Billie's comments, to Danielle's comments as well. I think Billie was hitting on basically know your why. So you can talk about the what and the hows and what your story is, but know your why so you can articulate that. So then Billie can make the case for you. When Danielle was talking about social enterprise and thinking outside the box, remembering that philanthropy is not the answer. Philanthropy is a tool to get you to the answer to be self-sustaining. So that's what I was hearing her point on. And so I point, what I would say about celebrating with allowing young people to fail, this is what I do inside of philanthropy now. I recognize that I am a young Black program officer inside of a predominantly white institution model. And that is always the lens and framework that I look at. So when I talk about funding programs for young people, when I talk about funding summer programs, I am looking at where could this go wrong? And if it goes wrong, how do we pivot? Because I expect it to in some form or fashion, because I don't expect an organization that comes to me for funding to have all their I's dotted and all their T's crossed. But it is my job as a program officer, with the resources I have available, to walk them through that process, to walk them through the behind the scenes of what's going to happen and what cannot happen, to walk them through that technical assistance, to point them in directions, to find more resources and more education so that we can make the best case possible. And I think the willingness to grow is what builds that strategic partnership that Billie has been hitting on some of the points that she made. I also think that it's important for philanthropy to let organizations fail in some aspect and be there when that happens. I think that we're dealing with a lot of stuff right now, a lot of organizations going around Baltimore, that we are afraid of failure. So I would say it like this: philanthropy needs to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that is not something that we traditionally do. And that is something that I have seen in my time at the foundation, both inside of Baltimore Civic Site, as well as the previous year that I was in the site. So I would say that is the biggest thing, if I could sum it up in a very succinct way, is becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable, which means that allows for the failure to happen and to pivot that aspect. We don't like to have egg on our face. And sometimes egg on your face means owning up to the mistakes, owning up to that accountability, and make sure it doesn't happen.
Thanks, Adrian.
And then real quick, I'll add, just in response to the youth support, we are definitely, it's written into our strategic plan that we fund youth leadership. We're getting a lot of entrepreneurship proposals, which isn't quite the same as like building leadership, but we are becoming friendlier to the entrepreneurship concept, and COVID kind of pushed us there, right? So I just want to highlight what I'm saying is, to us, leadership is solid developing young people. paying is more workforce development, which we don't do, but we do recognize the entrepreneurship is a great space. And for today's young people, it's so essential to work. So try us on the entrepreneur side, but definitely hit us up for the leadership piece. And then we've been friendly for a long time on community organizing. We believe in the stipends. We fund neighborhood work. And so neighborhood work, this credit to my organization. When our money comes in, that's earmarked for all these fields of interest. Again, the lion's share is education. And so BCF makes this commitment to BCF Baltimore Community Foundation, but we make this commitment to find and backfill our neighborhood money. So if you're doing any kind of neighborhood work, especially if you're a young person and you're organizing, that's a sweet spot. And we try to fund groups, even if it's not the youth organizations themselves, funding folks that are developing people in their neighborhoods. People have got to make more noise in this city. We got some loud ones, some pop-off activists, right? But you find too many times they're disconnected for real. You're in proximity of a lot of things, but you ain't been through it. Now, I'm gonna just keep it real. All my brother's been to prison. I haven't been. I'm in proximity. I'm a good representative for it, but it's nothing like when they sit at the table and talk about when they were locked up. I want to fund that, right? Yeah. And so again, not that I fund reentry, that was an example, but the young people piece, we believe in you, and we're pushing back to internally on how metrics are, not all metrics tell the story of success. I've seen this marketing game we play between nonprofits that have the resources to staff out multiple development people. They can sit and tell a whole story. And our grassroots folks who are on the ground, they don't have the resources to do it. And many of them don't have the skill set to write up a fancy story. So it's like, just tell us about your impact. Don't worry about metrics and data. If you're going to hit us up with an application, make us believe that you actually have your neighbors on board. It ain't just you, Lone Ranger, thinking you're going to change the world. We won't fund that, but we will fund a group of y'all organizing around something. Try BCF on that one.
Good.
The only thing.
Go ahead, Danielle.
The only thing that I want to add is that in addition to what we directly support through like our grant making and investment, also look out for opportunities on the side of like jobs and internships and opportunities to actually be at the table as it relates to the side of the work, which is making decisions around resource access. I know a lot of foundations really trying to figure out how to bring more young voices and perspectives into their teams, and speaking for myself, I didn't know what philanthropy was until somebody mentioned a job. I had no idea that these jobs, these jobs actually existed. So we're here to say that you should consider actually working in the sector at some point to really influence and shape what this sector actually becomes and make it more responsive to the needs of young people. So look out for those jobs, look out for those internship opportunities. Don't be afraid to ask and advocate for yourself. If you see someone that you would like to engage with as a mentor who is in the sector, these are the ways that we will really change, the course of, what philanthropy kind of looks like in Baltimore. And again, I just have to shout out the BCYF team, because I think that the team of the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund is really thinking about this in really exciting ways. I know that there's an effort to hire the next ED of the organization, but also think about youth leadership at every level of the organization. So look out for that as well, and look out for opportunities in the sector as well, so you can be the influencer.
Love it. That's a great point. Okay, y'all. Oh my goodness, we only have 7 minutes. I've been reading, trying to get through the questions in the chat. If y'all don't mind, some of these I think we can quickly just kind of address, and then y'all can just build on. For those who don't know, I did work in philanthropy for, I don't even know how many, I think 6 years at the Nekc Foundation. So I do have a little bit of knowledge around certain things. So there's a question in the comments about how you all view social enterprise organizations that are not a nonprofit. Can they connect with you with resources? I'm going to say the short answer is yes. When we talked about the plethora of resources, even beyond funding, is that correct? Okay. Next question was, accountability is a big issue for philanthropy. Can the panel speak to how they make sure their funds are being used as they envisioned? I think, Billie, you just talked about that. Most of you have already talked about that. Is there anything that you would add to that? Okay. I'm going to keep going.
There is accountability back to community too. I just want that we throw out accountability, and we're a community foundation. So, we have a different audience. Sometimes we have a wealthy fund holder audience, and then sometimes I'm trying to talk to killers on the street. I'm not lying about that. And so the accountability is big. It goes, when it's financial, I must account to, and there's all kind of mechanisms internally that happens through, which is why I said, if something goes belly up, I'm going to be called in and held accountable for it. But I also have to go back to community to explain. I really do try for people who are reaching out about what went wrong with their proposal. It's hard, right? Because we don't have enough time to do it all. But I love to give that feedback because I feel accountable to you about what I did or didn't see. And that has been enlightening, because that's when I realized, because I'm like, show me how you got these budget numbers. I learned you don't have a clue how to write it, but like, this is not even your fudging numbers, or you have no idea what you're doing. And I got to get you through another technical assistance track, right? And so that accountability loop all the way around is important.
Thank you for highlighting that, Billie. And then there's another question. Warren often hears about organizations that are doing the work on the ground throughout the city, but they are not receiving any funding because there is either too many strings attached or hoops to jump through, which Danielle talked about, sort of exploring ways to streamline that process. Are there situations where funders reach out to those organizations that are doing great work and provide support? The answer is yes. I know in particular, the Nekc Foundation does that. John, I saw you come off of mute. Is there anything else you wanted to say about that?
Yeah, what I would say is, one, is it's our job to break down as much structure and process as well, with also acknowledging you don't just go up to a booth and grab a check, right? There is going to be some process. Our job is to try to create relationship, right? And whatever we have that blocks relationship, we want to prevent. But we also do each of us that are, we have 7 people that work for the foundation. I do over 1,000 meetings in community a year. So we wear out our shoe leather going out and meeting with folks. And our sole goal in that is to meet people who know their neighbors by name, right? And so we're out there in community. And then we get lots of folks that say, hey, John, you should check this group out. And we'll be out there meeting with them. So that's our goal.
And thank you, John. And I would also say that's a part of the program officer's job, is to sort of understand what's happening on the ground and in the communities, and to be able to identify those innovations that are happening. Just great work. So we have 4 minutes. So here we go. In 30 seconds, y'all, this is the final question for everybody. When you think about this forum's theme, celebrating the wins and coordinating on the challenges, what is your vision for Baltimore? And yeah, anybody can start. Well, actually, I'll start with Danielle. Since you've been a part of BCYF since its ideation, you and John, I'll start with you. What's your vision for Baltimore when you think about that theme?
I think it's all about liberation and self-determination at the end of the day. And so my vision for Baltimore is a Baltimore in which all of the richness of Baltimore and all of the great ideas that we hear that are kind of rooted in our local communities really comes through in a way that we can set that dream, identify that idea, identify that solution, but have everything that we need to bring it into fruition. Because I believe that Baltimore has what it needs, but we have, some deep structural barriers that keep folks from bringing those solutions into fruition. And so that would be a part of my my vision for Baltimore.
Thanks, John. You want to pick it up?
Sure. So, I think Baltimore has amazing beauty, grit, and grace. It has that in abundance. And I think the ways in which we exemplify that every day is when we are knocking down barriers that allow communities to reach, to what Danielle said, their own self-determinations. When communities realize and can get to the places that they know instinctively they want to go, that's beauty, right? And it's amazing to see. But there are things in our community that prevent communities from doing that. And so, I think we're only going to be able to knock those barriers down together. And that's in working on the challenges. And we're only going to be able to realize the success when those communities are leading us to that. No one is sitting back saying, I can't wait for OSI or T. Rowe Price or Casey or BCF to lead us, right? It's ultimately community is going to be leading us. And so we have to make sure that we are led and that communities are doing that.
Thanks. Adrian, you want to pick it up and then we'll close it out with Billy?
Yeah, I actually moved to Baltimore 5 years ago today, and on the corner of where I live, there is a park bench that Billy has described on it, greatest city in America. And it has been very interesting for me over these last 5 years to see what that actually means in action. And so my vision for Baltimore is that it's not just my vision, it is a shared vision. And it is a collective vision that we are all a part of, and defining those same aspirations and reaching for those same milestones, those same achievements, while also still working through those same challenges together. So my vision for Baltimore is that it's a shared vision of what that actually looks like.
Then last, I guess I'll just say, BCF has this vision that all thrive, and I definitely subscribe to that. When it comes to our young people, though, my heart pains, aches for those that are trapped. Again, they're born into circumstances that if people if the village doesn't stop thinking about itself with these personal agendas, these young people need someone who actually loves them and cares. They actually need opportunity. And I think about my life. If I didn't have caring adults in my life, and I did not have a pathway out of the hood, I wouldn't be here today. I don't think I'd be on the planet. So my heart for that population that's trapped, how do you pull the lever that gets them equal opportunity? I want opportunity for all, but too much is playing out in our city, and it's been decades of certain demographics being locked out. We got to change that, and it takes more than what we've been doing. And so I'm committed to it.
Billy, Adrian, John, Danielle, from the bottom of my heart, thank you all so much, to my old friends and my new friends, for joining all of us today to help us to enlighten us pretty much and help us to better understand the Baltimore philanthropic sector and how you help make up the whole group that's working together to do exactly what Billy just talked about. So thank you all again. And I hope that you'll join us for the rest of the day. And if not, make it a great afternoon. Thank you.